San Francisco had a way of making ordinary lives feel small. Ethan Cole never minded that. He liked the quiet rhythm of their mornings, the way Olivia would sit cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone by half listening to the news. The coffee machine always sputtered before it worked, and the sunlight always hit the kitchen counter at the same angle, as if time itself had agreed to stay predictable inside their apartment. "You're going to be late again," Olivia said one morning, not looking up. Ethan smiled, tying his shoes. "It's flexible hours." "That's just another way of saying they don't care when you show up." He paused, glancing at her. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Flat, distant, like she was already somewhere else. Still, he brushed it off. They had been together for 7 years. People changed, moods shifted, life got complicated. That was normal, wasn't it? Olivia Hart used to look at Ethan like he was her entire world. Now, she looked at her phone more than she looked at him. Instagram, TikTok, endless streams of curated perfection. Women her age posing in penthouses, designer dresses, champagne under neon lights. Men in tailored suits with watches that cost more than Ethan's annual salary. "Do you ever think about more?" she asked one night. Ethan looked up from his laptop. "More what?" "More life, more everything." He frowned slightly. "We're doing okay, Liv." "Okay," she repeated, as if the word itself tasted bitter. The truth was, Ethan was building something, a startup, small, fragile, and constantly on the verge of collapse, but it was his. He believed in it the way some people believed in fate, but belief didn't pay for luxury apartments, it didn't buy diamonds, and it didn't compete with men like Alexander Pierce. Olivia met Alexander at a networking event she almost didn't attend. He noticed her immediately, not just because she was beautiful, but because she looked like someone who wanted more than the room she was in. "Olivia, right?" he said, extending a hand. His confidence was effortless, dangerous. She nodded. "Yes." "I can tell," he smiled. "You don't belong in places like this." She laughed softly. "And where do I belong?" Alexander's eyes lingered on her. "Somewhere higher." It started with conversations, then dinners, then silence. Ethan noticed the silence first. The way Olivia stopped asking about his day, the way she started going out more, dressing differently, carrying herself like she had already stepped into another version of her life. "Are you happy?" he asked her one night. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ethan felt something break. "I don't know," she said. That was the beginning of the end. Not the affair, not the leaving, just a quiet moment when love stopped being enough. Ethan didn't know about Alexander yet, but he could feel him, in the distance, like a storm that hadn't arrived, but already changed the air. The night Olivia left, San Francisco was unusually cold. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse, she didn't even explain. "There's someone else," she said simply. Ethan nodded, as if he had been expecting it all along. "Is he what you want?" he asked. Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks, and for a brief, fragile second, something like doubt flickered in her eyes. But it vanished just as quickly. Yes, that was all. Ethan didn't beg, didn't argue, didn't try to remind her of the years they had built together. He just stepped aside. As the door closed behind her, the apartment felt larger, emptier, like something essential had been quietly removed. Ethan stood there for a long time. Then he walked to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, and sat down in the silence. No tears, no anger, just a strange, hollow clarity. Somewhere in the city, Olivia was stepping into a brighter life. And Ethan? Ethan was about to disappear. Alexander Pierce did not chase. He didn't need to. Men like him built worlds that others gravitated toward. Effortlessly, inevitably, like planets pulled into orbit by a force they didn't fully understand. Olivia told herself she wasn't one of those people, at least, not at first. It began with a message. "Dinner was pleasant, but I suspect you were the only interesting part of it, Alexander." She stared at the screen longer than she should have. There was something dangerously precise about his attention. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, it was selective, intentional, like he had already decided she was worth noticing, and the rest of the world had simply blurred out. Olivia typed the reply, deleted it, typed again. "You don't even know me." The response came almost immediately. "I know enough to be curious." Curiosity, it felt harmless. That was the lie she told herself when she agreed to meet him again. The restaurant Alexander chose overlooked the bay, all glass walls and low lighting where the city shimmered like something untouchable. Olivia felt it the moment she stepped inside, that subtle shift, like crossing an invisible line between the life she had and the life she had imagined. Alexander was already there. Of course he was. He stood as she approached, his presence commanding without effort. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove itself. "You came," he said, as if there had never been a question. Olivia smiled faintly. "It's just dinner." Alexander's gaze lingered on her, not invasive, but knowing. Nothing is ever just anything, he said. Dinner with Ethan had always been comfortable. This wasn't. This was electricity beneath the surface of every word. Alexander didn't ask the usual questions. He didn't need her resume, her background, her carefully curated story. Instead, he asked things that felt intrusive in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Do you feel seen in your life?" he asked casually, swirling his drink. Olivia blinked. What does that even mean? "It means," he said, meeting her eyes, "does anyone look at you and understand what you're capable of before you even say it?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, because the truth was, Ethan used to. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying her silence like it was the answer he had been waiting for. "I invest in people," he said, "not just companies. Potential." Olivia let out a small laugh, trying to shake off the weight of his words. "And you think I'm, what, a good investment?" "I think," Alexander said slowly, "you've been living far below your worth." It was a dangerous sentence, not because it was cruel, but because a part of her believed it. That night, Olivia returned home later than she intended. Ethan was still awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, his laptop open but untouched. He looked up as she walked in. "Hey." His voice was warm, familiar, safe. "Hey," she echoed, slipping off her heels. "Long night?" "Yeah, networking event." It wasn't entirely a lie. Ethan nodded. "That's good. You've been wanting to get out more." There was no suspicion in his voice, no interrogation, just quiet support, and somehow that made it worse. Olivia moved around the apartment, avoiding his eyes. She could feel something shifting inside her, something she didn't want to name. "You should come with me next time," she said suddenly. Ethan smiled. "To one of those events?" "Yeah." He hesitated, just a fraction. "I don't know if I'd fit in." The words were soft, almost joking, but they landed heavily between them. Olivia forced a laugh. "You'd be fine." But even as she said it, she pictured Alexander, the room, the way people moved around him like he was the center of gravity. And Ethan. Kind, brilliant, unassuming Ethan, standing awkwardly at the edge. "No," Ethan said gently, closing his laptop. "That's your world. Your world. Not theirs. Not anymore." The next time Alexander saw her, he didn't take her to dinner. He took her to a penthouse. "I thought we were meeting for drinks," Olivia said, her voice catching slightly as she stepped inside. The view was unreal. The entire city stretched beneath them, glowing like something distant and unreachable. "We are," Alexander replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "This is your place?" "One of them." Of course it was. Olivia walked slowly toward the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. "You're quiet," Alexander observed. She let out a breath. "This is a lot." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You could get used to it," he said. She turned to face him. "And what would that cost me?" Alexander smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. Everything valuable always has a cost. The silence that followed was different from the ones she shared with Ethan. This one was heavy, loaded, full of choices that hadn't been spoken yet, but already existed. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked. The same question, but it felt different coming from him, more like a test than concern. Olivia hesitated, and in that hesitation, something shifted again. "I could be," she said. Alexander reached out then, finally closing the space between them, his fingers brushing lightly against her wrist. Not forceful, not rushed, just enough to anchor her there. "You should be," he murmured. That was the moment. Not when they touched, not when she stepped into his world, but when she stopped pulling away. Later that night, lying beside Ethan, Olivia stared at the ceiling. His breathing was steady, peaceful, like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. She could feel it. The distance, the pull, the quiet, undeniable truth forming in the back of her mind. She was already leaving. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. Across the city, Alexander stood alone in his penthouse, looking out over the skyline. He didn't wonder if Olivia would come back. He knew she would. People like her always did. Not because they were weak, but because once you showed someone a different version of the life, it became impossible to forget. And somewhere in the fragile space between loyalty and desire, Olivia was already falling. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never did. It lived in the pauses, those small, almost invisible spaces between words where something once warm had quietly gone cold. Ethan noticed it in the mornings first. Olivia used to linger. Now she moved. Quick, efficient, distant. Her coffee went untouched more often than not. Her phone never left her hand. Conversations became fragments, half-finished thoughts that dissolved before they could become anything real. "You're up early," Ethan said one morning, watching her pace near the window. "I have things to do." "What things?" She hesitated, just long enough for the answer to feel incomplete. Just things. He didn't push. That was Ethan's way. He believed in giving people space. He just never imagined that space could become something permanent. Olivia told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet. There was no line she could point to and say, "This is where I betrayed him." No single moment that defined the beginning of the end. Just a series of choices that felt small at the time. A dinner here, a late night there, a message she didn't mention, a truth she quietly edited. Alexander didn't demand her time, he shaped it. "You don't have to explain yourself to anyone," he told her one evening as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The wind tugged lightly at her hair, carrying the distant hum of traffic below. "That's easy for you to say," Olivia replied. "You don't have anyone waiting for you at home." Alexander glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Don't I?" The question lingered longer than it should have. Back at the apartment, Ethan was still waiting. Always waiting. He started cooking more often, as if routine could anchor something that was slowly drifting away. The kitchen filled with familiar smells. Garlic, butter, something warm and grounding. But the chair across from him stayed empty more nights than not. "You could have eaten without me," Olivia said one evening, dropping her bag by the door. Ethan looked up from the table. "I wanted to wait." "You don't have to do that." "I know." But he didn't stop. The arguments didn't start loud. They started tired. "You're never here anymore," Ethan said one night, his voice calm but strained. "I have a life, Ethan. So do I." "Do you?" She shot back, sharper than she intended. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're stuck." The words hung in the air, heavier than either of them expected. Ethan blinked, as if physically struck. "Stuck?" he repeated quietly. Olivia ran a hand through her hair, already regretting it, but not enough to take it back. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" She exhaled, frustrated. "I want more than this." There it was again. More. Always more. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her like he was trying to memorize something that was already fading. "And I'm not enough for that?" he asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had loved her quietly, steadily, without conditions, and for a moment doubt crept in. But then she thought of the skyline, the penthouse, the version of herself she had seen reflected in glass and light. "I don't know," she said. That was worse than a no. The silence that followed stretched for days, then weeks. They stopped touching, stopped laughing. Even their shared space began to feel divided, like two lives coexisting without truly intersecting. Ethan threw himself into work. Olivia threw herself into escape. Alexander noticed the change immediately. "You're almost there," he said one evening, watching her carefully. "Almost where?" He stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Honest." Olivia turned away, her chest tightening. "I haven't done anything yet." Alexander didn't argue. He didn't need to. "Not doing something," he said, "doesn't mean you're not already gone." That night she didn't go home until after midnight. Ethan was sitting in the dark when she walked in. No laptop, no distractions, just him, waiting. "We need to talk," he said. Her stomach dropped. She had imagined this moment 100 times. None of those versions felt as real as this one. Ethan stood slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. "There's someone else, isn't there?" The question wasn't angry. It wasn't even surprised. It was tired. Olivia opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. Ethan looked down, exhaling softly, as if releasing something he had been holding onto for far too long. "How long?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "It just happened." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "It always just happens." She stepped closer, desperation creeping into her voice. "I didn't plan this, but you're choosing it." The words were calm, final. Olivia felt something crack inside her. Not guilt, not yet. Something deeper. Fear. "He can give me things you can't," she said before she could stop herself. The moment the words left her mouth, she wished she could take them back, but it was too late. Ethan went very still. Not angry, not broken, just still. After a long moment, he nodded. "I know." That hurt more than anything else, because there was no fight left in him, no attempt to prove her wrong, just quiet acceptance. "I think..." Olivia's voice trembled now, the weight of the moment finally catching up to her. "I think I need to go." Ethan didn't ask her to stay, didn't remind her of the years, didn't beg. He just stepped aside, the same way he would days later, the same way he would let her walk out of his life without resistance. But tonight was the moment it truly ended, not with the closing of a door, but with the realization that love, no matter how deep, could not compete with a dream someone had already chosen. As Olivia packed her things, the apartment felt unfamiliar, smaller, colder, like a place that no longer belonged to either of them. At the doorway, she paused, waiting, hoping for something, a word, a reason, a plea. But Ethan just stood there, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered. He nodded once. "Goodbye, Olivia." And just like that, 7 years collapsed into silence. As the door closed behind her, Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break. Not yet. Because some fractures don't shatter you immediately. They wait. They spread slowly beneath the surface, until one day, everything falls apart. Ethan did not fall apart the night Olivia left. That was the part no one would have understood. There were no broken glasses, no desperate phone calls, no messages typed and deleted at 3 in the morning, no dramatic unraveling of a man abandoned. There was only silence. The apartment still smelled like her. That was the first thing he noticed the next morning. Not her absence, not the empty side of the bed, but the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air, clinging stubbornly to a space that no longer belonged to her. Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring at 2 mugs out of habit. Then he put one back. Routine became survival. He woke up at the same time, made coffee the same way, sat in the same chair, but everything felt slightly off, like the world had shifted a few degrees, just enough to make everything unfamiliar. He didn't check her social media. That was a conscious decision, not out of strength, but out of instinct, because Ethan understood something most people didn't. Some truths don't need to be seen to destroy you. The first week passed quietly, too quietly. Friends texted, he didn't respond. His phone rang, he let it. Work emails piled up, he answered only what was necessary. The world kept moving, Ethan did not. Until one night, he opened his laptop and stared at the code he had abandoned weeks ago. Lines blurred together, logic tangled, nothing made sense. Not because the work was difficult, but because his mind kept drifting back to a single, unavoidable thought. She chose someone else, not just someone, something, a life, a version of the future that did not include him. Ethan leaned back, running a hand over his face. "Okay," he whispered to the empty room. Not as acceptance, not as peace, just acknowledgement. The next morning he started again. There was no grand decision, no moment of clarity where everything suddenly clicked into place. Just a quiet shift. A realization that staying where he was, physically, emotionally, mentally, would only keep him tied to a version of his life that no longer existed. So he began to disappear. It started with small things. He changed his phone number, deleted his social media accounts, closed joint subscriptions, canceled the lease. Each action was deliberate, clean, final. He didn't leave a forwarding address, didn't tell mutual friends where he was going, didn't even tell himself, not fully, because the destination didn't matter, only the distance did. The apartment was the last thing to go. Ethan stood in the empty living room, the walls bare, the echo of footsteps replacing the laughter that once filled the space. 7 years, reduced to nothing more than a few boxes and a memory he refused to unpack. He found a photo in the back of a drawer, him and Olivia, taken years ago. They were younger, lighter. She was laughing at something he had said, her head tilted toward him like the world made sense when he was near. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he placed it back in the drawer, closed it, and walked away. No ceremony, no goodbye. The city didn't notice his absence. San Francisco moved the same way it always did. Fast, indifferent, relentless. People fell in love. People broke apart. People replaced each other every single day. Ethan was just another story swallowed by the noise. Across the city, Olivia's new life had already begun. Alexander's world was exactly what he had promised. Expensive, effortless, bright. The kind of life that looked perfect in photographs and even better in silence. "You'll get used to it," he told her one morning as she stood by the window of his penthouse, staring down at the city below. Olivia nodded, but something in her expression remained unsettled. "Have you heard from him?" Alexander asked casually, adjusting his cufflinks. Olivia hesitated. "No. Have you tried?" Another pause. "No." Alexander studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Good." But Olivia wasn't sure why that word felt so heavy. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Ethan's absence became absolute. No messages, no sightings, no trace. It was as if he had never existed at all. At first, Olivia told herself it didn't matter. This was what she wanted. A clean break, no complications, no emotional debris to sort through. But then, the question started. Where did he go? Did he hate her? Did he move on? Was he okay? She almost reached out once. Her fingers hovered over her phone, his old number still memorized despite everything. But then she remembered. He hadn't tried to stop her, hadn't fought for her, hadn't even asked her to stay. That thought settled into something sharp and uncomfortable. "He let me go too easily," she said one evening, more to herself than to Alexander. Alexander glanced at her from across the room. "Or maybe," he said calmly, "he knew he couldn't compete." Olivia didn't respond, because deep down, she wasn't sure that was true, and that uncertainty became the one thing she couldn't escape. Ethan, meanwhile, was no longer in San Francisco. The new city was smaller, quieter, unremarkable in the way that made it perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. He worked, that was all, day and night, relentless, obsessive, not because he was chasing success, but because work was the only place where his mind stopped replaying the past. He failed, often. Ideas collapsed, investments fell through, code broke, nothing came easily. But Ethan didn't stop, because for the first time in his life, there was nothing left to lose. And somewhere in that emptiness, something new began to form. Not hope, not yet, but something quieter, stronger, a version of himself that no longer depended on being chosen. Back in the city he left behind, Olivia stood in a room full of light, surrounded by everything she thought she wanted. And for the first time, she felt the weight of something she couldn't name. Not regret, not yet, but the unmistakable beginning of it. Time did not heal Ethan, it refined him. The first year was brutal. There were days when Ethan barely spoke, his voice unused, his thoughts trapped in endless loops that always led back to the same place, her silhouette in the doorway, the quiet certainty in her voice when she chose another life. But pain, when it had nowhere to go, eventually turned into motion, and Ethan moved. The new city didn't ask questions. It didn't care who he used to be, who he had lost, or why he worked until the lights in his apartment stayed on long after midnight. That anonymity became his refuge, his startup, if it could even be called that. Was fragile. An idea scribbled across notebooks, lines of code stitched together with trial and error, a vision no one else seemed to fully understand. Ethan built it alone at first. No team, no investors, no safety net. Failure came quickly. The first prototype crashed during a demo. The second never made it past development. The third almost worked. Almost. Most people would have stopped. Ethan didn't. Because failure to him no longer meant loss. He had already experienced that in its purest form. Everything else felt survivable. By the second year, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. A small investor took interest, then another. A beta version launched quietly, without press, without expectations. Users trickled in. Feedback followed. Not all of it good, but it was real. Ethan listened, adapted, rebuilt. By the third year, the company had a name, Nexora. It wasn't flashy, but it was his. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan Cole began to exist again. Not as the man who had been left behind, but as someone new. Success didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly. A funding round closed, a partnership formed, an article published in a tech journal that described Nexora as a company to watch. Ethan read it once, then closed the tab. Because recognition wasn't what drove him, not anymore. What drove him was something far less visible. Control. Over his life, over his future, over the parts of himself he had once given away without realizing it. He changed too. Not in ways people could easily point out, but in the details. His posture, straighter. His voice, calmer, measured. His eyes, less open, more observant. Ethan no longer waited. For anyone, for anything. And somewhere along the way, without realizing when it happened, he stopped thinking about Olivia every day. At first, it was unsettling. The absence of pain felt almost like betrayal. But then, it became freedom. Across the country, Olivia's life looked like everything she had once wanted. The penthouse had changed. Not in size, not in view, but in feeling. It was quieter now, colder. Alexander Pierce remained exactly who he had always been. Controlled, precise, untouchable. "You're overthinking things again," he said one evening, not looking up from his phone. Olivia stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her, just as it had the first night she stepped into his world. "I'm not overthinking," she replied softly. "Then what are you doing?" She hesitated. "I'm thinking." Alexander sighed, setting his phone down. "About what?" Olivia didn't answer immediately, because the truth felt too fragile to say out loud, about what's missing. Instead, she shrugged. Nothing important. Alexander studied her for a moment, then returned to his screen. Good. That word again. Always good. Always efficient. Always empty. Their life together was seamless, perfect even. No arguments, no chaos, no unpredictability. And yet, no warmth. Olivia had everything she once envied. Designer clothes, exclusive events, a social circle that measured worth in influence and visibility. Her photos drew attention, admiration, envy. But none of it stayed. Not really. Because the moment the camera was gone, so was the feeling. "You look incredible," someone told her at a gala, champagne in hand. Olivia smiled, Thank you. She had perfected that smile. Soft, gracious, detached. Later that night, standing alone in a hallway lined with mirrors, she caught her reflection from an angle she didn't recognize. For a second, she didn't see herself. She saw someone else. Someone curated, constructed. Someone who had traded something real for something polished. The thought came uninvited. Ethan would have laughed at this. Not cruelly, not judgmentally, just honestly. And for reasons she couldn't explain. That memory lingered longer than it should have. Olivia? She turned. Alexander stood at the end of the hallway, watching her. You're needed. Needed, not wanted. She nodded, stepping back into the light. Years had passed, and yet, somewhere deep beneath the surface of her carefully constructed life, something had begun to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. A quiet realization, forming piece by piece, that everything she had gained had come at a cost she was only now beginning to understand. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan stood in a glass-walled office overlooking a different city. A team moved around him. Conversations buzzed. Screens flickered with data and projections. Congratulations, his business partner said, extending a hand. We did it. Ethan shook it, a small nod. That's just the beginning. And for the first time in years, there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Not pain, not emptiness, but quiet certainty. The kind that didn't need to be seen, didn't need to be proven. The kind that came from rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, until the person you became no longer needed the one who left. And somewhere, without knowing it, Olivia was about to face the one thing she had been avoiding all along, the truth. The first crack didn't look like a crack, it looked like silence. Olivia noticed it on a Tuesday evening, not because anything unusual happened, but because nothing did. Alexander sat across from her at the dining table, scrolling through emails on his tablet while a perfectly plated dinner sat untouched between them. The city glowed outside, the same dazzling backdrop that had once made her feel like she had stepped into a better life. Now, it felt like a screen, flat, distant, untouchable. You're quiet, Alexander said without looking up. Olivia almost laughed. The irony of it pressed against her chest. So are you, she replied. I'm working. You're always working. He finally looked at her then. Not annoyed, not defensive, just mildly inconvenienced. That's how this life works, Olivia. This life, not our life. She pushed her plate slightly away. Do you ever stop? For what? For this, she gestured vaguely between them. For us. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her as if she had just asked a question in a language he didn't speak. We're sitting here, aren't we? It wasn't an answer. It was a dismissal. And for the first time, Olivia felt it clearly. Not confusion, not doubt, but something sharper. Emptiness. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a truth she had been avoiding finally demanding to be seen. Alexander didn't love her, not in the way she had once understood love. He valued her, admired her even. She fit into his words seamlessly, elegant, composed, presentable. She was an extension of his success, a reflection of his taste, but she was never essential. You knew who I was when you met me, he said calmly, returning to his tablet. The words were simple, but they landed like something final. Olivia stared at him, and suddenly she did. Every moment replayed itself differently now. The way he had approached her, not with curiosity, but with certainty. The way he had drawn her in, not by offering himself, but by offering a life. The way he had never once asked her what she needed, only what she wanted. And she had mistaken that for the same thing. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said quietly. Alexander didn't respond, because to him there was nothing wrong. That was the problem. Days passed, then weeks, and the cracks spread. It was in the way conversations ended before they began, the way his touch felt absent even when it was there, the way laughter never quite reached her anymore. Olivia started noticing things she had once ignored. The women at his events, beautiful, polished, interchangeable, the way they looked at Alexander, and the way he looked back. Not with desire, not even with interest, but with quiet assessment, like everything and everyone had a place, a function, a value, including her. You're over-analyzing again, he told her one night when she brought it up. I'm observing. You're creating problems where there aren't any. Olivia shook her head slowly. No, she said. I'm finally seeing them. Alexander sighed, standing up from the couch. If you're unhappy, Olivia, that's something you need to figure out. I've given you everything you said you wanted. Everything. The word echoed in her mind long after he left the room. Everything, except what mattered. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She walked through the penthouse barefoot, the marble floors cold beneath her feet, the silence pressing in from every corner. The city stretched endlessly outside the windows, bright, alive, indifferent. She stopped in front of the glass, her reflection staring back at her. Perfect, composed, unrecognizable. And for the first time, the thought came fully formed. I made a mistake. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no breakdown. Just a quiet, devastating clarity. Ethan's face appeared in her mind, not as he was at the end, but as he had been before everything broke. The way he listened, the way he noticed things no one else did, the way he loved her. Not as something to possess, but as someone to understand. She had called that life not enough. Now, she couldn't remember the last time she had felt anything real. The memory tightened around her chest. He would have stayed. The thought was immediate, instinctive, painfully certain. No matter what, no matter how difficult things became, no matter how uncertain the future looked, Ethan would have stayed. And she had walked away. A sound behind her pulled her back, Alexander standing in the doorway, watching. "You should get some rest," he said. Olivia turned to him slowly. For the first time, she didn't see power, didn't see control, didn't see the man she had once believed could give her everything. She saw distance. "I don't think I can do this," she said. Alexander didn't react the way she expected. No anger, no panic, just a quiet, measured pause. "Do what?" he asked. "This," she said, her voice steadier now. "Us." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "If that's how you feel." That was it. No fight, no attempt to change her mind. No sign that losing her meant anything beyond a minor inconvenience. And in that moment, everything became undeniable. She had not chosen love, she had chosen an illusion. And now, standing in the center of the life she had once dreamed of, Olivia realized something far more terrifying than regret. She realized there was nothing here worth staying for. But the one place she wanted to return to, the one person who had ever truly been hers, was already gone. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon. Olivia almost ignored it. It was just another event, another polished gathering of investors, founders, and carefully curated success stories. The kind of night she had once lived for. The kind she now attended out of habit rather than desire. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the name at the top of the program, Nexora. She frowned slightly, her fingers hovering over the screen. The name stirred something faint in her memory, distant, undefined. She almost deleted the email. Almost. The venue was exactly what she expected. Glass walls, soft lighting, a skyline that made everything feel elevated, important, untouchable. People moved in clusters, their voices blending into a low, constant hum of ambition and performance. Olivia stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the floor, her expression composed, effortless. No one would have guessed how little she wanted to be there. "You made it," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned, offering a polite smile to someone she barely recognized. Of course, that was the thing about this world. It didn't require authenticity, just presence. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to drink, her eyes drifting across the room without focus. Until they stopped. It wasn't immediate recognition, not at first, just a subtle shift. A pause in her breath, a feeling she couldn't explain. And then, she saw him. Ethan, but not the Ethan she remembered. He stood near the center of the room, speaking to a small group of investors, his posture relaxed, his voice steady. There was a quiet confidence in the way he held himself, nothing forced, nothing performative. People were listening, not politely, not out of obligation, but because what he was saying mattered. Olivia felt her grip tighten around the glass. Her heartbeat quickened, loud in her ears. It couldn't be, but it was. Time did something strange in that moment. It didn't rush, it didn't freeze. It stretched, pulling her backward and forward all at once. 7 years, reduced to a single unbearable realization. He was no longer hers to recognize. Ethan turned slightly, and their eyes met, for a brief, fragile second. Everything that had once existed between them flickered back to life. Or maybe, that was only in her mind, because Ethan didn't react. Not the way she expected, not the way she feared. He simply looked at her, calm, neutral, unmoved. And then, he nodded, a polite acknowledgement, nothing more. The gesture hit harder than anything else could have. Not anger, not resentment, indifference. Olivia felt something collapse inside her. She forced herself to move, to breathe, to exist in a space that suddenly felt too small for the weight pressing against her chest. He returned to his conversation. Just like that, as if she were a stranger. The rest of the room blurred. Voices became noise. Faces lost meaning. There was only one thing she could see. The distance between who he had been and who he had become. Later, she found him alone. Of course she did. Ethan stood near the edge of the balcony, the city lights reflecting faintly in the glass beside him. He looked the same, and completely different. Ethan. Her voice was softer than she intended, almost unsure. He turned, no surprise, no hesitation. Olivia. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice. Not cold, not warm, just distant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There were 1,000 things she could have said. Apologies, explanations, questions, but all of them felt too small, too late. You look, she began, then stopped. Different, better, untouchable. Good, she finished. Ethan gave a slight nod. Thank you. The silence returned. He didn't feel it, didn't help her, didn't make it easier. You disappeared, she said finally. A simple statement, but it carried everything she hadn't said before. Ethan's expression didn't change. I moved on. The words were calm, uncomplicated, final. Olivia swallowed. I tried to find you. That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Ethan studied her for a moment, not searching, not lingering, just observing. Why? The question caught her off guard. Because She stopped, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence without unraveling everything. Ethan didn't wait, didn't push. He simply nodded again, as if her silence had already answered him. I'm glad you're doing well, she said quickly, the words spilling out now, desperate to fill the space. I mean it. I am, he replied. No elaboration, no invitation, just truth. Olivia felt her chest tighten. This, Nexora, she gestured vaguely, it's yours? Ethan followed her gaze briefly, then back to her. Yes. There was no pride in his voice, no need to impress her. That, somehow, made it worse. I always knew you'd do something like this, she said. A lie. Or maybe, a truth she had only learned too late. Ethan didn't respond. The city lights flickered between them, reflecting off the glass, creating the illusion of closeness where none existed. I made a mistake. The words came out before she could stop them. Ethan's gaze held hers, steady, unreadable. Yes, he said. No hesitation, no softness, just agreement. Olivia flinched, the quiet certainty of his response cutting deeper than anger ever could. I didn't understand, she continued, her voice trembling now, despite her effort to control it. What I had, what you were. You understood, Ethan interrupted gently. Not harsh, not cruel, but precise. You just chose something else. The truth settled heavily between them. Olivia felt her composure slipping, the carefully constructed version of herself cracking under the weight of something real. I thought it would make me happy. Ethan nodded once. I know. And it didn't. A pause. I'm sorry. There it was, finally. But apologies, Ethan had learned, were often more about the person saying them than the person receiving them. I believe you, he said. Olivia looked at him, hope flickering for the first time since she had seen him. But it didn't last, because his expression didn't change, not even a little. She hesitated, her voice softer now, fragile in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. I didn't think you'd just let me go. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. You already left. The words landed with quiet finality. I wasn't going to chase someone who had already chosen not to stay. Olivia's breath caught. And now, she asked, almost afraid of the answer. Ethan looked at her, not the way he used to, not with love, not with longing, just clarity. Now, he said, I don't need you to choose me. The sentence was simple, but it ended everything. Olivia felt it, deep, undeniable, irreversible. Not rejection, closure. Ethan stepped back slightly, creating space where there had once been none. It was good to see you, Olivia. Polite, respectful, distant. Then he turned and walked away. No hesitation, no second glance, just forward. Olivia stood there, the city lights blurring around her, the noise of the room rushing back in all at once. For the first time, she understood. It wasn't that Ethan had changed. It was that he had become someone who no longer needed the past to define him. And she was nothing more than a part of that past. A choice he had already survived. A lesson he no longer needed to revisit. And in the space he left behind, Olivia felt something she had been avoiding for years finally settle into place. Not longing, not confusion, but the full, undeniable weight of regret. Regret did not arrive as a storm. It came quietly. In the days after the event, Olivia found herself replaying every second of that night. Not the conversation itself, but the spaces between it. The way Ethan had looked at her, or rather, the way he hadn't. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, no trace of the man she had once known. And that absence, that complete, unshakable calm, stayed with her longer than anything he had said. She tried to move on, told herself it was just a moment, a collision of past and present that didn't need to mean anything. But meaning had already settled in. Deep. Irreversible. 3 days later, she sent the message. Can we talk? Just once. No expectations. She stared at the screen for a long time after hitting send, her chest tight with something she couldn't quite name. Hope, fear, desperation. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Of course he didn't. He had never been impulsive. When his reply finally came, it was simple. There's nothing left to say, Olivia. She read it once, then again and again. Each time the words felt heavier. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Still, she wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. Please, she typed back. Just one conversation. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then. One coffee, tomorrow, 10 a.m. That was all. The cafe was small, quiet. Nothing like the places Olivia had grown used to. Ethan had chosen it. Of course he had. She arrived early, sat by the window, watched the door like something inside her depended on it. When he walked in. Time didn't slow this time. It didn't stretch or blur. It moved exactly as it should. Ethan looked around briefly, then spotted her. He walked over, calm and unhurried, as if this were just another meeting in a long day. Hi, she said softly. Hi. He sat across from her. Not too close, not too far. Just enough distance to make it clear. This was not what it used to be. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waiter came. They ordered, left, and still, silence. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. I didn't think you'd say yes. Ethan shrugged faintly. You asked. That was the difference now. He responded, but he didn't reach. I've been thinking a lot, she said. I figured. She let out a small, unsteady breath. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know that. Ethan said nothing. But I needed to see you again, she continued. Not at that event, not like that. He studied her for a moment, not with curiosity, not with emotion, just acknowledgement. You saw me, he said. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't kind either. It was reality. Olivia swallowed, forcing herself to continue. I made the wrong choice. Ethan didn't react. I thought I knew what I wanted, she said, her voice quieter now. I thought I understood what mattered. And now? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Anything that resembled the past. I know I didn't. A pause. I lost something real, she added. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. Yes, he said. The agreement hit her like a physical force. But I found myself again, he continued calmly. That. She hadn't expected. Olivia blinked, her breath catching. Ethan held her gaze, steady and composed. I needed to lose you to understand what I was giving away, he said. Not just to you, to everything. The words were not accusatory, they weren't meant to hurt. But they did. I'm not that person anymore, Olivia. She felt it then, the finality, the line that could not be crossed back. I'm not asking you to be, she said quickly. I thought maybe, she trailed off. Because there was no version of that sentence that didn't sound like hope. And hope was exactly what he didn't offer. Ethan shook his head gently. Whatever you're looking for, he said, it's not here. The truth settled in slowly. Not rejection, something deeper. Closure that didn't come with comfort. I miss you, she whispered. The words felt small the moment they left her lips. Ethan's expression softened, just slightly, but not in the way she needed. I know, he said. And he did. That was the hardest part. He understood. He saw her. He recognized the weight of everything she was carrying. And still, he didn't step toward her. I loved you, she said, her voice breaking now. Ethan nodded. I know. Past tense. Always past tense. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. Not this time. Is there really nothing left? She asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's respect, he said. There's history. There's understanding. He paused. But there's no future. The words were gentle, careful, and absolute. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, the weight of them settling into something permanent, irreversible. When she opened them again, Ethan was still there, still calm, still steady, but no longer hers. I'm glad you're okay, she said softly. I am, he replied, and this time she believed him. They sat there for a few more minutes, the conversation winding down not with a conclusion, but with a quiet acceptance. No more questions, no more attempts, just the understanding of what was, and what would never be again. Ethan stood first. Olivia followed. For a brief moment, they faced each other in the soft morning light, two people who had once shared everything, now separated by something time could not repair. Take care, Olivia. You too, Ethan. No hesitation, no lingering. He turned and walked away. This time, she didn't stop him. She didn't call his name, didn't hope for him to turn back, because now she understood. Some choices don't just change your life, they define it. And some people, no matter how deeply they once belonged to you, are only meant to be part of your past. Olivia stood there for a long time after he was gone, the city moving around her, indifferent as always. For the first time in years, there was no illusion left, no dream to chase, no version of reality to escape into. Only truth, and the quiet, enduring weight of a choice she could never undo. Somewhere else in the city, Ethan walked forward without looking back, not because he had forgotten, but because he no longer needed to remember. And in that quiet, steady movement toward the life he had built for himself, he finally found something that had once felt impossible.